Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch. I'm your host here today on MLGBA Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts Lesbian and Gay Bar Association. If at any time you'd like to call in, you have a question, we invite you to please call in. Our number here is 617-708-3290. I see it's on the screen, so that's convenient. Our guest here today is Ben Kline. Ben is with GLAAD, the gay, lesbian advocates and defenders who have done heroic, historic work here in Massachusetts and throughout New England. I asked Ben to come in and let us know what's going on, what happened in 2009 as far as GLAAD is concerned, and what's going to happen in 2010. Ben, how are you?
I'm good, Tim. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
So, what happened in 2009 from GLAAD? First of all, I should probably ask you, what is GLAAD?
Well, GLAAD, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, is a legal organization that has been around for over 30 years, and our focus is on litigating cases in courts throughout New England that will establish important legal protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, as well as people living with HIV. So we work mostly in the courts, but we're also very involved in legislative efforts to advance rights as well.
That's awesome. And what about 2009? What happened?
2009 was a very full and exciting year in really all the areas we work. And I think probably the most notable thing about 2009 is the advancements in marriage for lesbian and gay people, with some setbacks as well. Massachusetts, as you know, became the first state to legalize marriage for same-sex couples in 2003 with the Goodrich decision, which went into effect in 2004. And more recently, GLAAD has established a campaign, which we call our 6x12 campaign, to achieve equal marriage rights for lesbian and gay people in all 6 New England states. And New England is really where a lot of the cutting-edge work is being done. GLAAD won a lawsuit in Connecticut at the very end of 2008, establishing marriage in Connecticut, the Kerrigan lawsuit. And subsequent to that, in 2009, the action really turned to state legislatures, where our GLAAD, working with our partners in each of the New England states, has really been doing some important work there. And I think that we were, in some ways, surprised by the incredible pace of victory. Between January and April of 2009, 3 more states in New England established marriage through the legislative process: Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And that was really an incredible success, bringing us to 5 New England states out of the 6 that have marriage. Now in Maine, they have a process where it's very easy to take a bill that's passed by the legislature and put it on the ballot for a vote of the people. So there's a very intense and hard-fought campaign in Maine this fall where a lot of hearts and minds were changed about marriage, but we fell short, and the vote in that referendum process repealed the law the legislature had passed and signed by the governor, establishing marriage for same-sex couples. And I think that was a very painful loss, certainly, but I think it really tells us a couple of things. And I think one is that although it was a loss, almost 50% of the people in Maine support marriage for same-sex couples, and that is a very significant number in a very short amount of time. But what it also tells us is that I think there can be some feeling in New England especially, where there has been such progress, that we really have reached equality, and that that's really not the case. There are still significant numbers of people who do not believe that gay and lesbian people are equal citizens and should have the same access to basic institutions and legal rights, such as marriage, as everybody else does. Yeah. And I think that it's really a reminder to people that ignorance, fear, and discrimination still exist, and we have to keep working, and we will change those hearts and minds. I think in Maine, part of the part of the process was that the legislature passed the marriage bill on the first run through, which is not something that usually happens in the legislative area.
No.
And then there was a very quick vote by that November. And what we've learned from the marriage work in all the states where we have been working is that when people really see couples and they see families and they see that how they're harmed by the denial of marriage, and they see how marriage, when they look at states like Massachusetts and Connecticut and see that marriage for same-sex couples really protects families and harms nobody, then we win. But that is a process that takes time. It takes time to change people's minds and to get people to that full understanding of gay and lesbian people. So the loss in Maine was disappointing, but there will eventually be another vote in Maine, and we will prevail ultimately. So, that's what we have to keep our sights set on as well.
Are there any, now the Maine referendum, I assumed then that the same-sex marriage law never took effect in Maine.
That's right.
And are there any legal challenges up there with respect to how the whole process worked, whether when there can be a referendum on people's rights and things of that nature? I mean,
right. I think there really aren't in this particular case. So I think that what people are looking at, there's a lot of discussion going on now in Maine as to what are the next steps. Are there bills the legislature could pass in the interim until such time as it's ready to pass a marriage bill again? And what kind of education work needs to be done? Because the campaign in Maine against marriage for same-sex couples was largely funded by out-of-state money. It was groups in California and elsewhere putting significant money into Maine to produce a series of television advertisements that used a lot of scare tactics.
Yeah, I've seen some of them.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
and they're really misleading, they're false, they use fear about what will happen to children if marriage for same-sex couples is legal in Maine. And we really need to go back and continue the education work that happened in a very condensed period of time during the election campaign to really rebut some of the myths and fears that were put out there by the opponents. So I think the emphasis is on what steps can the legislature take in the meantime, and really continuing to do the work that we do in every state to change the hearts and minds of people. Because what we know in Massachusetts is we actually had a very long process. We had years of litigation to achieve the victory in the Supreme Judicial Court. Then we had attempts to pass a constitutional amendment in the legislature. And it was actually through that very extended process where people saw that when couples married, everybody was more protected, nobody was harmed, that the myths are just that. And we need to have that extended process in a state like Maine as well.
Take a moment to remind